few slides from Africa. Some of you who've been to WAPI or API know those slides. They're being updated, don't worry, but it's just to give you a very quick idea. So what you do have is basically three blocks in Francophone Africa, Francophone West Africa, Central Africa, and the DRC. What's to remember about Francophone Africa is that unlike most, I would say, English-speaking African countries, there is a high integration between countries in Francophone Africa, which basically means that for some countries there is a single currency which is applicable throughout the region, which means that there is one central bank, which also means that there is a single business law among most of Francophone African countries. So you shouldn't look saying, well, not Francophone Africa, but for example, Senegal or Burkina Faso are too small of a market to look at. Actually, it's a much broader market. Some of you already know these slides, but I think it's always quite interesting to compare the economics of English-speaking West African countries with those in French-speaking countries. You see a very big difference, and that's due for several reasons. But for example, I'm not even going to look at the Nigerian part, because this is obviously a market of its own in terms of size. But what you see, you have Nigeria, Ghana, and then 3 Francophone countries. In terms of GDP growth, you see that, well, basically on the right, it looks a bit more appealing, I would say, than those on the left. It's most of the people are saying, because we come from so low base, that obviously we're catching up, but it also means that it's a good time to get into the market. But let's compare just Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, and we can see that basically these are very similar economies in terms of size. GDP is pretty similar, per capital income it's very similar, population also, and level of urbanization also. What differs is obviously the growth rate and the very impressive difference in inflation between what's happening in Ghana and in Côte d'Ivoire. And that's mainly for Côte d'Ivoire, it's because it's back to the euro, and therefore it's reflected in the inflation. Last year, one of the organizers basically said that for people coming from South Africa, it's very difficult to see exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about Abidjan and Dakar. And basically, I've got very quickly a Google map there, and what we do see is that it's basically a lagoon where you have islands a bit all over the place, which is going to stand up. But it's going to be exactly the same in Dakar, but what you do see is that the former CBDs, they are a nightmare in terms of traffic, poor maintained office blocks, and therefore the companies are basically moving out to the south in Zone 4 and to the north in Cocody, where also you have mainly the retail shops, knowing that the airport is over there. So you can imagine in terms of traffic, you have a few bridges here and there, but otherwise it's difficult. Dakar is basically, it's even worse, I think, because it's a peninsula, so there is absolutely no way to expand. The original CBD is over there. You see some office and retail, which is being developed in the north, close to the, I don't know if we can say the former airport, because it's next week, I think, in 2 weeks, the new airport is going to be launched, but the airport being in the city itself. I think Senegal had an interesting idea in order to get out of this peninsula. It's basically to set up or to create a new city about 30 miles out of Dakar, where the new airport is now. And there is a lot of developments going on there. Obviously, I think the idea is the municipalities and the ministries and so on are going to move there. And it's supposed at least to give a little bit of fresh air to the capital city in terms of traffic development and so on. This year, usually what we do is that we always like to compare the opportunities and challenges between Dakar and Abidjan, and which one is more interesting in terms of development, investment, and so on. What I would like to do this year is, rather than compare both, it's look from the opportunities from an outside eyes, I would say, from outside eyes. In the sense that in our panel today, we have people from South Africa and from Nigeria who have experience in Francophone Africa. And I think what would be very interesting is to hear from them what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what do they find the most difficult, because they're used to work in English-speaking environment, and obviously we always, I would say, scared of the red tape, the French system, I would say, that we find in most of Francophone Africa. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from them. What do they think, what's the best market, and so on. What we're going to do, I think, starting with Patrick, is just to give them the mic and to introduce themselves and what's their experience.
Great, yeah, thanks, Ivan. I think we should have put a notice at the door that the session would be English and not in French. Yeah, so Patrick Katama, I'm an account director at Cushman & Wakefield, based in Johannesburg, and I look after global occupiers from a client representation perspective, and I primarily focus on consulting and advisory, and my involvement in Francophone Africa has been across the board, from acquisitions, disposals, lease renewals, lease reviews, and general market reports. Traditionally, I would say, in my view and in my experience, Francophone Africa was almost reserved for France alone. And it's only in the last sort of 5-7 years that other nations and alternative sources of capital have started entering these markets. And I think that is something that will be probably growing more and more in the near future. And it's not necessarily because France has reduced their interest. I think it's more South African companies and global companies looking at alternative markets, and that is why the Francophone markets are becoming much more popular.
Thank you. So my name is Taslim. I'm from Senegal. I run a relatively small development company. It's a family business, and that goes with the construction business as well. So we've been in the business since 2005. We focus primarily on high-end multifamily residential. We've recently diversified into more mid-end, the mid-end segment, kind of positioning a bit above it, between high-end and mid-end, so we call it intermediary. So we have about a portfolio of about 40 million in development going on right now. And yeah, excited to talk about Francophone and what we see for the next few years going on there.
Good afternoon. My name is Maiwa. I had the opportunity of working in Abidjan, doing some research and consulting on property and facility management. I was there for just under a year, and there's a lot of I would like to talk about in terms of the comparison between Nigeria and Abidjan.
Good afternoon. My name is Mustafa Tiao, and I run an advisory and capital brokerage based out of Dakar. My experience is mainly in the US. So I did underwriting for residential mortgages that were packaged to be sold, which led to the credit crisis. So I did that through about 2006, 2007. Then I tried to take advantage of the opportunities by investing in residential real estate, which I thought, and I thought the crisis would last a couple of years. It lasted way more than that, so I had to change and do something else. I got into commercial real estate, got into asset management, doing almost the same, but for commercial, doing CMBS, underwriting and asset management for all type of structured loans, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Goldman Sachs, structured finance, and so on. So I decided to come back to Senegal a couple of years ago because when I visited, I saw all the construction cranes. I felt that the dynamics of the city, especially in real estate, were good. We were on a good trajectory, and I wanted to come and be a part of it. I have a lot to say about the vibrancy of the market, and we'll get into it with my panelists. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Mustafa. The first question I have for our panel is that, as I mentioned, English-speaking investors from South Africa or from the UK are still a bit reluctant to come to Francophone Africa. I mean, it's changing, but very slowly, let's say that. That may be because of the language, the cultural barriers, the, as I said, the red tape. But what I would like to ask to Patrick is, from your experience at Cushman, where do you see the opportunities in terms of market? Not only in terms of countries, but in terms of sector that you wouldn't see, for example, in Nigeria.
Yeah, so I think with regards to the first part of your comments around South African investors or English-speaking investors being reluctant to go into Francophone Africa, I think it's primarily because there were a lot more lower-hanging fruits closer to South Africa. You can fly in and out of Mozambique, Zambia, Malawi, same day. If you need to go to Senegal or Abidjan, it's quite a distance, and you don't have the daily flights. With regards to the opportunities, more and more investors are looking for logistic and distribution centers, which are almost non-existent in Francophone Africa. So I would say there's quite an opportunity there to be untapped. In markets like Zambia, some of the developers who did it on a speculative basis overspec'd the developments. They went super green, whilst your occupiers were looking for something basic that has natural ventilation, natural lighting, sufficient docking bays. They're not looking for something extremely fancy. So in my view, the big game changers in Francophone Africa, especially that you've got the port advantages, would be if you do basic distribution centers.
I'd like to follow up on that. And what I'm always, I always found interesting when I come to Lagos, and especially here, it's exactly the same as power cuts, regular power cuts. Would you say that one opportunity that exists in Francophone Africa, maybe because of the French heritage, is I would say, the stronger infrastructure in terms of power, in terms of other facilities that you wouldn't see in English-speaking Africa?
Maybe it's part of the equation, but I think if you look at geographically where we're positioned, and you start drawing distances from potential points of entry into the continent to all the different major sources of capital, we're in a very, the Francophone West Africa is very well positioned. We're at a crossroad, going from north to south north, and the east-west axis as well. So just the geographic position is one thing. We've done a decent job, I'm not sure it's well, is the countries is trying to redefine themselves as potential hubs for logistics, even for tourism. You talk about business, the business segment of it, you talk about the leisure segment of it. They're really trying to think about how we can make all centers.
Okay. No, turn to Mayowa, as I had the chance to work with Mayowa for a year in Abidjan, and Mayowa obviously is working in Lagos for the moment, so he has the view of both the work environment, business environment in Nigeria and in Cote d'Ivoire, and I would be very, because we never spoke about this, I would be very interested to hear, now that he's not working with me anymore, what are his thoughts, and how would you compare it, and the plus and the con on each side, basically.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. Just to go over what Patrick said, I think in terms of the attraction of Francophone West Africa is a lot to do with logistics. When I was in Abidjan, there was a lot of international people dabbing their toes, I would say, in the marketplace, especially people from South Africa as well as Nigeria. During that period of time, Nigeria and Ghana were sort of taking a dip economically. So a lot of people were looking at additional ways of maximizing their returns. And Cote d'Ivoire was building momentum at that time. So a lot of people were interested in Cote d'Ivoire. However, at the same time, a number of factors, especially the language barrier, I personally struggled with that, I must be honest. The cultural society as well was a little bit different from what we're used to in Anglophone Africa. So I think a lot of people saw the potential opportunity of Abidjan in this case and were interested in exploring it. However, they were extremely cautious, which is natural to be, and there is a lot of potential, I would say. I would not necessarily compare Nigeria to Ivory Coast because Nigeria is a mammoth on its own. So it's not, there is no, in terms of comparing like for like, will be very difficult. However, I think the infrastructure in Abidjan, for example, I could count on two hands the amount of time there was a power cut, and that never lasted more than 10, 20 minutes at the most. You didn't have generators blurring every second of every day. The road, the bridges as well was thought of. So I think, from my personal point of view, as long as the infrastructure continues to be developed and foresight is applied, it could become more and more attractive for other people in Africa to explore it a little bit further.
Yeah, I would like to build on that with Mustafa, actually. Mayowa just mentioned that investors are still cautious getting into Francophone Africa. It's the case for Cote d'Ivoire, it's the case for Senegal. Why do you think that? Because when you look from the outside, infrastructure is not bad, economy is growing very fast, the currency is very stable, very low inflation. My personal opinion is that, these are not the best, but debt financing is possible and affordable, considering the interest rate. Why do you think it's so difficult for foreign investors and foreign developers to go into our markets?
I think it's mostly fear of the unknown. With the French system, it's fairly cautious. But the reality is, Francophone Africa has a lot going for it. I'll start with infrastructure. Yes, in Dakar we don't have power cuts that often. It's not perfect, but we're building power plants. We're building new coal power plants, solar power plants, and I'm in my office building days of wind generation company that's going off the ground. So we're going to be, I would say, close to energy independent very, very soon. Secondly, we have that peg from the CFR to the euro. That's an advantage. And here, in the other panels, I hear about FX volatility. That's not a factor in Francophone Africa. So that's another plus. As far as the business climate, it's different. But today, the ranking, the doing business ranking, the World Bank doing business ranking of Senegal is better than in Nigeria. It is better than in Ethiopia. Ivory Coast is at 139, Senegal is at 140. And that's a ranking that came during the last month. So for those, and those are not the only reasons. We talk about corruption. Corruption, at least when measured by the major institutions, is much lower in Senegal than it is in Nigeria. And it's an index, I'm not inventing anything. There are other factors as far as red tapes and bureaucratic red tapes. Honestly, you come to Senegal, you come see me, we go see the right people. We can go see the Prime Minister, we can go see the Minister of Housing. We get things done, but people have to muster the courage and let the preconceived notions go and come and explore the market. There are huge opportunities in Senegal. Social housing, if you don't like that, we have that mid-grade. So for all the middle class that need housing, we have a lot of development in high end. The middle class needs housing, and they make anywhere from, for households, anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 a month. So they can afford a $200,000 house or apartment, and we have yet to have enough people come and invest. We don't, we're not asking for help. We just want people who want to make money to come and work with us and make that money. We want to fly in private jets next time we come to the WAPI. So let's make it happen.
Thank you, Mustafa. I looked at Taz's face when you were talking about corruption, and we're not going even to go there.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, of course.
So, I think two things in terms of what scares people. Our processes indeed tend to take a bit longer, but as Mustafa said rightfully, if you have the right local contact, it can go faster. The other question that comes back is, I hear often from investors, what's the depth? What's the actual depth of the market? Is it just shallow? Is there going to be enough? I mean, we talk about putting out a lot of supply out there. Is it going to be enough demand to absorb it? And to be quite frank, there's not enough research or data, market level data that's available to kind of confidently say, on an empirical basis, yes. But the dynamics are kind of suggesting that yes. So those are two things that I usually hear. People are also asking for scale, investors. Not realizing that it's going to be built up over time. There's an aggregation that needs to happen. There's a maturation of the industry or of the sector that needs to happen before we can have like similar size deal that what you have in English-speaking countries. So those are usually three things that I hear. But as Mustafa said,
obviously we're always talking about Abidjan, we're always talking about Dakar. Is there, in your opinion, any other markets than that, or we should only focus on those two markets and the other ones being too small, we should disregard them?
Yeah, so I think there's other markets out there, certainly the likes of Cameroon, the likes of Chad would also focus to a certain extent. You could go as far down as DRC, which are all part of Francophone. But your occupiers would want to establish themselves in a market where they can find places where they can comfortably operate in. And if you have to compare these countries together, I think Ivory Coast probably offers a bit more than what Cameroon or what Chad would offer, as an example. Within 3 to 6 months, you can comfortably find 400 square meters of office space in Abidjan. Unlike in a place like Cameroon, where your waiting period is much longer. The occupiers who are looking for larger space, 2,000 square meters plus, they will obviously start their search much earlier, and at this point in time in Abidjan, there's more than 3 mixed-use developers that will provide you more than 2,000 square meters. And there's already a lot of work that has gone into it, and this project will most likely materialize. Unlike in a market like Cameroon or Togo that's just around the corner, where there could be aspirations for an occupier to be in those markets, but because there's limited stock, they rather than set up operations elsewhere and cover the market from a regional perspective.
I think it's time to go to the audience and see if there are questions.
So I'm actually from Ghana. So as it happens, Dakar is one of my favorite places in West Africa. I don't know why, but I think in the previous life I've probably seen this. When I fly to Lagos, I can fly to Lagos for $250. It costs me $700 to fly to Dakar from Dakar, right? And I can't wrap my head around why. But that's off the bat is one of the barriers to entry when it comes to. So currently in Ghana, there's a discussion ongoing about the need for integration with Francophone West Africa. And it's a function of the fact that we are surrounded by French-speaking countries. And Nigeria can get away with it because Nigeria is just a beast and it's like a subcontinent on its own. But long term, we can't. And I think my experience with my previous employers, so I will come to West Africa and they'll set up shop in either a European non-French, multinational or American company would set up in Africa. Normally they'll set up in Nigeria because of the size of the market and to do business here. And then typically they'll set up the rest of West Africa office in Accra, right? It's easy to do business and they can fly wherever. And most of the time the people that are working there may or may not, they'll slowly starts to move either to Abidjan or Dakar. And so from a Ghanaian perspective, what happens is, and again, I saw this at GE, we went from, the Accra office being, the center of power, if you will, in West Africa, to all of a sudden the Abidjan office being where everything was happening because it had to cover the rest of the region. So this is why the question I ask is, why don't more Ghanaians invest or try and do business with the rest of French-speaking Africa? I've talked about the cost of travel, but another thing is, I would argue that it didn't seem as though French-speaking West Africa wanted our business, right? And that's a function of, it seemed like you guys were good. There's money coming from France, there's money coming from Quebec, you guys are doing your own thing, but a classic example, if I think of even young people, right, I consider myself as a young person, if I'm on even social media, how much French-speaking Africa content am I getting, right? Any successful Ghanaian business person, next thing they think of is, let's go to Lagos. But if you're not ready for this market, it will eat you up and spit you out. So, and I think culturally, right, okay, not culturally, but in terms of outlook on life, I would argue we're closer to Ivorians than we are to Nigerians. But again, these are some of the issues why I would say we're not doing business, and hopefully over time, as I say, the smart money is moving that way, and it will change.
Ghana. I think you're right to say that historically, at least, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire were technically the same. I was driving in Ghana, got stopped by a police officer, and basically, the guy wanted to bring me to court to Accra. And my driver speaks a certain local language, which also can be found in Ghana. And obviously, you could find a way out because he could speak directly to the policeman. I think so. There is something. Another story which shows how Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are so far from each other, maybe because of again, the history and colonial history and so on. One of my clients is a local developer and wanted to develop a retail center. And basically what I said to him is, we're going to go to Accra, going to look at Accra Mall and to see a little bit what's happening there. Because the council that he took from Paris basically wanted to build Dubai in Abidjan. It didn't make any sense. But the guy is basically a CEO of a large company, never went to Accra, but flying every week or so to Paris. So it shows that Paris is closer to home than Accra, which is 40 minutes away by plane. So there is something behind it. Thank you very much. Faustin, you wanted to add something?
You French-speaking guys. I remember advocating a few years ago. When I say a few years, it means something to me. About why no investment in French-speaking Africa. I'm happy today that we organize panels, and there is somewhere written, French-speaking Africa. It's new to everyone here. We've been looking for reasons why Francophone Africa has been ignored up to now. I think there's none. The truth is, I think the interest and the appetite investors have today about Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Cameroon, and others, you owe a lot to the Nigerian downturn. I mean, all is there. For years and years, Ghana and Nigeria have been the favorites of every investor. A few years ago, Nigeria began, going a little back, and people shifted their interest. Now that we are outside, because, I don't want to seem like I'm biting the hand that is feeding me, but I work for a South African company. A few years ago, when you talked about Senegal, the question would be, where is that? As simple as that. Today, when you say Senegal in the board meeting, people have lights in their eyes because they know where that is. Now that we are outside South Africa, now that Nigeria is going back, now that, Ghana is not that well away. Maybe we should look at what is outside there. And it happens to be that outside there is only French-speaking countries. People that didn't interest anyone up to now. So my question is for you guys, and it's something I've already asked you individually. Are you ready? Are you ready for what is coming to you? Because, obviously, you can be understood by South Africans. You speak English. It is covering for most of the people outside here. We can communicate with you. You have a money that is more stable than the Naira or the cedi. Are you ready for what is coming? Are you prepared?
Bring it.
This year is the first year that we have actually non-native French speakers in the panel, which also shows something. Sorry.
On that point, I'm sorry for doing this, but we've seen some of the players who've been big in other markets now come. I'd be curious, I'm seeing a few in the room that are coming into our countries. If they wouldn't mind sharing how they got there and what they're seeing. I think about access.
A mic for Funke, please.
Charged to move into new markets. So we are quite active now in both Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon, but it didn't happen last year. We've actually spent the last probably 3 to 4 years actually actively looking at opportunities in this market. So it takes quite a bit of time to, first of all, get the investment committees comfortable to understand how to manage risks in this environment. Sometimes we have the advantage because we have multi-funds looking at different sectors. So for instance, in Cameroon, we're invested in managing the energy distribution company, NEO. So we had gone into Cameroon way back. In Cote d'Ivoire as well, the Azito power plant, that has been an investment that we've done probably about 7-8 years. So on the back of that, we actually actively looked at opportunities. So to be fair, I think the Cote d'Ivoire story is less about Nigeria, but about post-conflict, what the opportunities were. In terms of Cameroon, I think what it was initially for us was about looking at NEO, which where we look actively at those markets. Now you said to us, some of the points which are very interesting about the facts about the stable currency, accessible finance in local currency. I think also the fact the infrastructures of these countries are quite attractive relative to the markets that we're used to. And actually, it's quite easy to operate because you find both in Cote d'Ivoire and in Cameroon, where you find the government are quite active in trying to help to promote investments. One of the things is one of our colleagues, and they're not here at the HCCP, they have a mall which they're building in the Yukobong area in Abidjan, and they've already gotten some tax incentives. And in those tax incentives mean they actually had paid their taxes, and now they're getting the refund of paid taxes in cash from government. So if you are in Nigeria, that's almost next to impossible. The best case will be used as a prepayment for tax that will fall due in the future. And so obviously we're quite find this market attractive, but from all what we've been hearing, one of the key things is about really ensuring we all have a good understanding of effective demand. And at the same time, we also all have to be careful that a lot of information or investments that we're making actually based on data where we can actually understand and not run into developing cyclically and everybody moves in a head mentality. So there has to be a lot more that people will do. So while I would say yes, real estate overall, we look at the macro story, there's a very detailed micro story to make sure that all the investments that we're making make sense. So if I leave with a question, it will be about effective demand and depth of, and I've had invitations to us to maybe sort of begin to look at further afield within Francophone. How do we get those data points that help us to actually make these investments? So, and I'll leave with a point on Nigeria as well. I think sometimes when you're on the headlines on Time magazine and say everybody says it's the best investment opportunity, that probably means it's over already. The time is over. So right now where the headlines for Nigeria is very negative, it's probably time when people should need to start thinking what is possible in Nigeria. Well, please, my question.
We are in Francophone Africa, unlike Nigeria, unlike Kenya, it's a very mature market, so the data is not yet there. But what we do see, I think, a lot more is the market is, while growing, you have more and more real estate professionals going into this market. We see that among the real estate service company, more and more are looking to get into those markets. And what does it mean? It means they bring with them their expertise, more transparency, and so on. I think it's the normal path to answering the question of the investor, obviously.
So in fact, I'm a former banker, and when I came back in Cote d'Ivoire, let's say 4 years ago, I couldn't start in banking as the market was not there. So what I did is I built a database in Abidjan. We realized that last year, the job that we've done during a lot of time spent on the ground, taking photo, measuring surfaces, knowing who was inside, etc., that we did at the beginning. Months ago, one of your colleagues another fund, came in our office, saw what we produced in terms of maps, in terms of data, which was not collected on an agile way. It wasn't very agile because it was, as I tell you, we went on the ground, took pictures, and it was very